So, you see, I am a black African woman who grew up in a very resource-scarce context. In fact, I was born in Harare, and in the first few years of my life, I went to live with my grandparents in the rural area. So when we talk about rural poverty, it's something I've experienced myself. I've seen it. I've lived it. Then upon the death of my grandparents, I moved to Victoria Falls to join my parents. So very different, you know, the huge contrast between the city and the rural context was very startling for me in those early years of my life. But there were questions. I had so many questions. How come my life with my grandparents is so different to this life? You know, when you see something for the first time, you're excited, but also you ask a lot of questions, how you couldn't access it before and why. I did my high school at a very interesting girls' school, so the girls' environment, you know, around issues to do with women's education in Zimbabwe. It was a very interesting policy narrative at that point. I had this thing in me that as a woman coming from a very humble background, I should be able to make it. That's the only way I could change my own life. But there was much more. Not just my life, I wanted to change the lives of many others like me. And I knew that to do it, I needed to have a much more sharper mind on understanding issues and narrative. My first degree was on nutrition. I had this inclination towards public health, and I wanted to understand more on the causes of mortality and why. I started working on HIV. Growing up in the 90s, I saw lots and lots of deaths. And again, it was why them, not them, because it's not anyone at that time who had HIV who would die. Those who were wealthier, they would be able to extend their lives because they could purchase better care, better services. But those without, they died in their dozens, like flies. So losing family and friends, and with nothing, not knowing what to do to change that was not an easy thing growing up. So wanting to change that narrative, I wanted to be trained at one of the best institutions in the world. So GDI was a natural option, but again, it had to do with funding. But thanks to Leverhulme, I managed to get here. I did my PhD on allowable deaths and valuing human lives, because that has always been central to what I wanted to understand. So I got that opportunity to do exactly what I wanted to do, something that would not just make me study or have a PhD, but something that would make me change lives, ultimately. My life and others, I know. So that's how I found myself here. So after defending my thesis, I started working with the Overseas Development Institute as a research fellow there. And it's such an amazing, dynamic space for development. I was in the growth, poverty, and inequality cluster, so really engaging on poverty issues, income inequality, and, you know, of course, the narrative around widening inequalities. My focus was mainly on SDGs, so I've been looking at the policy trade-offs in decision-making, and especially in the context of 17 goals and 100-plus indicators, how policymakers need to start thinking about making, you know, decisions that won't cause negative impacts on the lives of the most marginalized and vulnerable populations. I've also looked at, you know, women's economic empowerment, looking at rising, you know, online, the on-demand economy, online platforms for accessing work. I've also looked at migration and health, written a paper on that. So among other, you know, things, blogging and writing. So it's given me that space to start talking about this whole narrative from a research angle, but also packaging this information to a different kind of audience, you know, mainly policymakers and, you know, development practitioners alike. And at the same time, still engaging with, the Research Triangle Institute International, which is a very big research entity, American, working with the Zimbabwe Ministry of Health and Childcare. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at the Global Development Institute with funding support from the ESRC's Global Challenges Research Fund. And I'm mainly working on sharing my findings with the world and developing a new methodology for understanding what matters most to the most vulnerable populations in some of the world's poorest countries. It's amazing what a PhD can do, On a personal level, first, it helps you to drop everything you know and unlearn. Sit down, learn, so you learn to unlearn. And then you start building the pieces anew. So you build piece by piece. So it's like a broken glass, and you've got to let that glass become a glass again that you can use to drink water. And it's not an easy process. It opens up your mind. You become very critical in how you engage with everyday discourse. Something I think has changed me in so many ways, not just in how I engage professionally in my work and ask questions about why things are and how we get to know what we know, But I think also just how I see things now. I think I'm very, very independent researcher. I'm able to go and do my own research and write a new narrative, something that contributes to knowledge differently than I used to. But also just opportunities to engage in different platforms, because you're knowledgeable in your area. So people enjoy listening to people who have done good research, and especially from reputable institutions. And given that GDI continues to be, in the top most respected institutions in global development, my PhD is quite something I'm really proud of, and being a product of this institution. I mean, definitely not. I wasn't going to be able to fund myself. Maybe for a year, that's it. Then I would drop, I would withdraw. So definitely, it made a huge impact in my life. Frankly, if it wasn't for Levaum, I don't think I would have been able not just to fund my own tuition, but also, basic survival. There's a very thin line between access to funding and knowing how to target that funding to those who need it the most. It's very unfortunate that in our context, those who have access to internet, who can buy bundles, who have access to information on where funding is. So if you're poor, you will remain in your little corner. Not because you don't deserve it, but because you don't have the means. I'm saying this because I am an African who found myself in this context, and there's so many other aspects in access to funding. But what I found so unique about Levaum is it targeted those very marginalized social groups. And I'm one example who managed to get these. Two things. The first one is my environment here. When I got to the UK, it's a very different culture, very different context. Even the school environment is also somewhat different, and so I didn't know what to expect. But coming to GDI, it's so diverse, very international. So it was very easy for me to feel at home immediately. So I just fit in, so easy. So such a place where you just come in and you just feel at home because you can identify. So that was amazing for me. And the second aspect, my team of supervisors, just unbelievably awesome. My primary supervisor, you know, Philip Woodhouse is just fantastic. Admos Chimo, absolutely phenomenal. Sarah, you know, Professor Sarah Brecking, unfortunately she left, but just an incredible team. And not just that team, but you then get to engage with other folks in the department. Everybody has an open door policy. So, you know, so and so is an expert on this. You just knock and get in and you say, look, this is my issue, can you help me? They will set aside time for you to engage with you on that, give you materials and say, can you come back again? That's amazing. There are three things that I always say to my friends. You're a woman, you want to get into development, you want to influence decisions, or you want to get into academia. What's stopping you? Go for it. Be certain what we want to do, don't zigzag. You know, be certain, identify the right schools, best schools, go for it, apply, do it. Don't question, don't wait for somebody and say, do you think I should do it? You feel it, go for it. You want to get into development. I think it's amazing. With development, you actually deal with almost everything. You just focus if you want. But, you know, you get the opportunity to explore so many areas, from environment, disaster mitigation, health, politics, geography, architecture. It's all development. So it's just amazing. There's so much you can do. So go for it. And you're female. You've got power. You can do it.